Well, it's great to be with you once again, and it's great to be with you in worship with you. We're going to encounter God today, and I'm super excited about what we're going to talk about the third week here in Decoding Decisions. But before we jump into that, what I'd like for us to do, as you probably know, is worship God through song. So if you would, let's just join in our hearts together. Let's sing this song together here in just a few moments, and then we will jump into the teaching of His Word. But as we do all of this, singing, listening to the teaching, going in, looking at God's Word together, I pray that the one thing, the singular focus that you and I have is this unity in bringing God His glory and exalting Jesus. Let's do that today.
Come, let us sing for the joy of the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before Him with thanksgiving and extol Him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In His hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to Him. The sea is His, for He made it, and His hands formed the dry land. Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For He is our God.
That the highest King would welcome me. I was lost, but He brought me in. Oh, His love for me. Oh, His love for me. Who the sun sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last, He has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, He died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place
Today, I want to share with you something that is an extreme important quality that has an incredible potential for you, for your life, for your spiritual life. It has this potential to just change the trajectory of your life. It can be the key to spiritual strength, spiritual maturity. It could be the key to your relational intimacy, financial potential. I mean, it is the key that can just unlock a lot of doors for your life. And the good news is this: it's not based upon wealth, it's not based upon education, it's not based upon physical appearance, but as I said, it has the potential to impact your entire life. And that that potential, or that key, whatever you want to say, however you want to define it, is the word consistency. That word consistency has the ability to literally unlock all kinds of doors in your life, that positive doors. It can help you spiritual, as I said, your spiritual growth. It impacts your relational intimacy, the way you deal with finances, the way your physical health, all of this stuff. I mean, every area of your life. That word consistency, that key consistency, or that quality consistency, can have a tremendous impact, an absolutely tremendous impact. All right. Now, some of us would say, you know what? The only thing I'm consistent in is being inconsistent, right? It's hard, isn't it? To be consistent is very hard. But because many of us struggle with that, right? Many of us struggle with that. That is something that like when we think about our physical health, eating the right things. Being consistent on eating the right things, drinking the right things, being consistent in our spiritual lives, where we are consistent reading God's Word, we're consistent in praying, we're consistent in gathering together, consistent in being part of a small group. That's hard. Exercising, being consistent to exercise, back to our financial health, or consistent in our not financial health, but our physical health. How about our financial health? Being consistent on tithing, being consistent on budgeting our money, being consistent on paying our bills on time, being consistent on, just you name it. That word consistency, or that quality, I don't know how to describe that trait, that characteristic, being consistent is very hard, but the impact, the return on investment of being consistent is absolutely profound in our lives. And I think it's really interesting. I think I shared this with you guys last week. I can't remember if I shared it with you last week or in person, but one thing I love about the Bible is when we read the Bible, we read about individuals that struggled with life at times. They weren't all perfect. That's what I like about the Bible. There's only one person that was perfect, and that was Jesus. Every other person that we read about in the Bible, there's things that may have happened within their life that we can relate with, because they're human too. And they struggled with certain things. They were challenged with certain things. And so when we look to the Bible, I love that we can see men and women within the Scriptures, within God's Word, that struggled as they walked their spiritual walk. It encourages us, not that they struggled in their spiritual lives, but that we can relate with them, that we see that they weren't perfect. And one of the individuals that we look at that I think is a giant within the New Testament is the guy by the name of Paul, the Apostle Paul. In Paul's life, he wrote such deep letters in the New Testament as he planted churches, and he wrote to these churches and wrote some really deep theological concepts. But on this other side, we also see a guy that struggled sometimes with things. And in Romans chapter 7, verse 15, listen to what he says. He says this: "For I do not understand what I'm doing." And this is the last person you would ever think would be saying that. He says, "I don't understand what I'm doing because I do not practice what I want to do, but I do what I hate." And so now we read about his life and we know that Paul was on fire for God. Paul was on fire for Jesus. But I think it's very interesting that he makes that statement where in his life, I think he's saying, you know what? I struggle with being consistent. Like here, I want to do this, but that's not what I want to do. What I do is I do what I hate. And I don't think that characterized his life by any means, but I think he was just giving us a glimpse into his humanness. That at times he struggled with certain things. I know what to do. I don't understand it. I don't understand what I'm doing. Have you ever had that moment in your life where you look at your life and you say, this is what I want to do, but I don't know why I can't do this. I don't know why I can't be more consistent in the things that I eat. I don't understand why I can't be more consistent in my spiritual walk and whatever that may look like. I don't understand why I can't be more consistent with my finances. I just don't understand this. I think, Paul, I can relate with that. Because instead, there's times where we do literally the opposite, which it kind of sabotages what we truly want. But if we can focus in and think about this whole concept of being consistent and working hard at being consistent, it really matters. It really matters because it can determine the quality of our decisions, which is what we're talking about. This whole concept of decoding our decisions. You know, we make our decisions, as we said in the first week, we make our decisions and then our decisions makes us, right? And if we make these bonehead, stupid decisions, they can have tremendous negative impact within our lives. And if we're not careful, we become bad decision makers. We're not good decision makers at times. And that, I think all of us can relate with that. I think all of us can relate that we've made decisions that aren't They're poor. We've made poor decisions. Now, on the flip side, I think some of us we've learned from that and we've become more consistent on making good decisions. And in fact, we can relate with what I talked about the first week where we said, you know what? I'm going to be predetermined. I'm going to be predetermined. I'm going to make a choice back here. And before I even am faced with some of these decisions, I'm basing it on these values that are good values that God has placed within my life, that God has helped me discern, where God has given me the wisdom to develop these good values. And because I have these values and I want to live my life based upon these values, it's going to make my decision-making process a lot easier. It doesn't mean it won't be difficult or hard, but we already know the answer. The choice has already been made back here. Now we just have to be consistent, right, in executing that. So when I am faced with this decision, I've already made it. It's a no-brainer. I have already made the decision. I'm not going to look at certain things. And so when I'm faced with that temptation, like we talked about last week, when I face that temptation, it's already been predetermined that I'm not going to look at that. And I'm not going to tiptoe up to that line. I've already made the decision that I want my life to be pure. And so I'm not going to tiptoe up to that line. I've already made the decision. I'm already predetermined that I'm going to have a plan in place when I'm tempted. Okay? Now, of course, I'm talking about temptation right now, but you get what I'm saying. And I'm going to be consistent. That is the key. If I'm consistent with what I've been predetermined back here, I'm going to make good decisions. I'm going to make decisions that are based upon the values in which God has allowed me to discern, has helped me to discern, has given me the wisdom to build my life upon. And because of that, I'm going to make good decisions. But again, it starts with being predetermined, right? And after we're predetermined, we are going to stay consistent with that. And so that's kind of what we're looking at in this series. We're looking at ways that we can make solid decisions, where we can decode these decisions and make good decisions. Because as I said, and we probably can't say it enough, we make decisions and the decisions makes us. They begin to determine the quality of my life. If I make poor decisions and it's based upon things that are not good values that God has allowed me to discern and given me the wisdom to implement within my life, if I don't base my decisions upon those, I'm going to make poor decisions and it's going to affect the quality of my life. Because now I'm going to start living out the implications of some poor decisions. And so the key is, this week we're talking about being consistent. So we're predetermined. We're going to have a plan in place when we're tempted to not make a good decision, because a lot of our decisions are based upon, what I want, right? Our desires, our human desires. And we have to be very careful, and we have to see that up front. But if I base mine on my predetermined, and I have a plan in place, I'm going to make good decisions. I'm going to stay consistent and make good decisions, deny myself, make good decisions, and then that's going to affect the quality of my life, because I'm going to be living my life God's way. This week, I want to share with you, I want to go back to a Bible, an individual within Scriptures that we talked about, I think, the first week. I don't think we touched on him last week, but a guy by the name of Daniel. And many of you are familiar with Daniel. And Daniel, I think we can, as we look at Daniel's life, I think we can definitely see this predetermined, where he was predetermined. He already made the decision to follow God back here. He had a plan in place if he was faced with this decision, and he was definitely consistent. He was definitely consistent in his spiritual walk. He was consistent in his leadership, and that's what we see within his life is, I think, this consistency. This consistency. Now, let me share with you, if you're not familiar, or if you're a little bit familiar, or just entertain me so that I can share if some may not know some of the context of who Daniel was. Now, many of us probably know that Daniel, we probably heard the story of Daniel in the lion's den, some of his friends that were predetermined as well, and they had a plan in place, and they stayed consistent, and they were put in a fiery furnace, right? And so we read about Daniel. Those are some of the stories we may be familiar about Daniel with. But let me just give you some context. If you remember, we go back, the nation of Israel was one nation. At some point, they divided. And you had the northern kingdom and you had the southern kingdom. Okay? And I won't get into the whole story of how they divided, but let's just kind of take us to the point where Israel during Daniel's time was divided, and you had the northern kingdom and you had the southern kingdom. Well, as the story goes, both of these kingdoms began to live the way they wanted to live, and it was not God's way. They were not living how we've been talking about, being predetermined and having a plan and being consistent. They were consistent, but they were consistent in making poor choices. And so God sent them, and so they began to fall into sin, idol worship, and all kinds of other things. And so God would send them messengers. God sent them prophets to both of these kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And he sent them prophets to tell them, to warn them, to say, look, if you don't turn your ways, if you don't start making good decisions and start following me again, making the decision to follow me, then there's going to be some bad things happen. You're going to live out the implications of your bad decisions, and that's exactly what happened. And so God used a foreign nation named Assyria to come in and decimate the northern kingdom because they didn't repent, they didn't stop sinning, they didn't confess and turn from their ways. But instead, they continued, and God sent them prophet after prophet, and then it was time. It was like, okay, God said, okay, if that's what you want, if that's the choice you're making, then you're going to live out the implications. Again, their decisions begin to, they begin to live out their decisions, and it definitely affected their quality of life because Assyria, a wicked nation like Assyria, came in and literally decimated them. You would think that the southern kingdom, that happened first before the southern kingdom, you think the southern kingdom would have taken note of that and saw that because they were getting the prophets too, telling them they need to turn from their ways. But again, they didn't listen either, and they continued to make their bad decisions, their poor decisions, and then their decisions began to make them. And then God sent Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon came over and took them in captivity. In 3 waves, he took back large groups of people from the southern kingdom and decimated Jerusalem and took them to serve, to become servants in Babylon. And so that's what took place. And so as the the king did this, as Nebuchadnezzar did this, he brought over in the first wave the young and the leaders, the next leaders. And as he brought them over, he saw that they had these leadership characteristics and qualities, and that they were very smart, they were very intellectual. And Daniel and his friends were in that first wave. And so then what King Nebuchadnezzar began to do was he began to feed them his food, his rich food. He began to teach them their ways. He began to culturalize them to the Babylonian culture, kind of deprogram them, kind of brainwash them in a sense. Because he wanted them not to think about their old ways, who they used to be back here as an Israelite or as a Jew, but instead they were going to become a Babylonian. Okay? Again, this is where we see consistency with Daniel. Because Daniel was not going to do that. And last week, I think it was last week we talked about, that he said, I'm not going to eat the king's food. So he was very predetermined. He already knew the decision. He was not going to do that. He was going to serve God. But we can see how, again, Daniel, through this, displayed this unusual consistency, okay? And people saw that, and the king Darius saw that. And he saw that Daniel was very wise. He saw that Daniel was very intelligent. He was very, let's use the word wise, because to me, it comes from him being predetermined. That's what the king saw within him. He was God had just blessed him, right? And he was doing it God's way. When we live out God's way, it affects the quality of our lives in a good way. So King Darius probably went to him and said, hey, we're going to promote this kid, okay? We're going to do this. And so as King Darius kind of took note of Daniel, some of his leaders got a bit jealous. And they're thinking, okay, this guy from Israel, this guy from the southern kingdom over here is going to come over and he's going to level jump and he's going to get the positions that I want. And so they became jealous of Daniel. So they began to scheme a plot against him. All right. They begin to scheme a plot. But listen to what it says. Listen to what it says here. It says, they were going to try to drag up some dirt on him, okay? Kind of like in politics. They're going to go back into his history. They're going to go back and find out, where did he slip up? What did he, where's this a spot back here, this skeleton in the closet, so that we can drag it out and we can make him look bad and just show the king that this guy is not who he's cracked up to be. But what they found out was something different, because Daniel, again, had been predetermined to follow God, had developed a plan when certain things would come, that he was not going to make that decision, and that he was consistent with being predetermined and making the right decisions. And so they couldn't find anything. And in Daniel chapter 6, verse 4, it says this: the administrators and the satraps, therefore, kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom, but they could find no charge or corruption, for he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. They couldn't find anything. They couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn him. That's wild, isn't it? One translation says that he was faithful, he was always responsible, and completely trustworthy. Faithful. That's what that means, faithful. Predetermined. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. They couldn't dig up anything. He was consistent in making wise decisions based upon his being predetermined. I'm going to follow God regardless of what happens. So you can see that being consistent is a very powerful quality. A very powerful quality. He was responsible. He was trustworthy. He was faithful, right? And again, Daniel kept, just by being consistent, threatened these other guys. And so they became more passionate about trying to bring Daniel down. And so what they did was, since they couldn't dig up any dirt, then they said, okay, well, let's go about this from a different angle. They go to the king and they recognized that Daniel was consistent on praying. Okay? That he was consistent on praying 3 times a day to God. Okay? And they became aware of that. And so they go to the king, and I don't think the king he wasn't obviously aware of it, because they go to the king and they say this, "Hey king, you are the greatest king ever. I think you ought to make a decree. For 30 days, no one can pray to anybody but you. They can't pray to God, they can't pray to their God, they can't pray to anybody but you." And the king says, "That's a great idea." They puffed him up, and he says, "That's a great idea. I'm going to make that decree. And furthermore, if someone does do that within this 30 days, we're going to throw them in the lion's den." So here they go. They've got him, right? But look at this situation. Look what happened. Again, you may be familiar with this story. In Daniel verse 10, it says this, "When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, the decree, he went into his house. The windows in its upstairs room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, and he gave thanks to his God just as he had done before." He was predetermined to do this. He was very consistent with it, and they knew that. These other leaders knew that, and this is what was going to get him in trouble and thrown into the lion's den. And that's exactly what happened. They said, "See, this is what Daniel's doing." And so the king kind of regretted it, because the king liked Daniel. He liked Daniel. And so the king regretted it, but he had to follow through on his plan. And so they took Daniel and they threw him into the lion's den. But if you've heard this story, you know what happened next. In the backside of chapter 6, verse 23, the backside of that verse, that 23, it says this, "When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God." Now, here's the question. When did Daniel learn to trust God? Was it in the lion's den, or was it before? And you know the answer to that question. It was before, because he was predetermined back here. He was going to trust God in all things. He was predetermined. He learned to trust God in his prayer, through his prayers. He learned to trust God before he ever faced the battle. His trust was in God. It was built upon his knees. He had consistently sought God 3 times a day in prayer. 3 times a day in prayer. That's why he, I think, was consistent, right? Now, let me ask you this question. Don't you find it hard to be consistent with God at times in our prayer lives? Isn't it easy to be more inconsistent, even though that's what we want to do? It's very hard, but Daniel prayed consistently. He prayed consistently, not just occasionally, but he prayed consistently, and that made the difference. That's where he grew. He grew before the battle. He was predetermined, so that when he faced that, he was already there. He had already made the decision, the choice. Okay? And he stayed consistent. Now, the question I have is this. How do you grow in your consistency then? Because that's something that I want. Because I don't know about you, but I struggle with it at times. It's so easy. It's so easy, whatever it is, to be consistent with that. In my physical life, in my finances, in my relationships, in my spiritual walk. It's easy to be inconsistent, but it's very hard to be consistent. So the question for me is, how do you do that? How do you become more consistent? Okay? Well, I'm going to give you 3 things to think about. The first one is this. We start with the why. And what that means is this. When we are going to grow in our consistency, or want to grow in our consistency, we pre-decide that we are going to be consistent. Okay? We pre-decide that. We're going to start, and why? Why do we do that, right? Why do we want to be consistent? Why am I going to be predetermined back here to do this? Let's ask this question. Why did Daniel pray consistently? Why did he pray consistently? It wasn't like, the Pharisees that kind of just aired out their prayers so everyone could look at them. But Daniel devoted his life to God. That's why he was consistent in his prayer life. He had devoted his life to God. He had committed his life to God. That's why it wasn't based so much on desire either. I mean, I have the desire for something, but sometimes my desire will not carry me through with it, okay? But if we're going to be consistent, we have to have a good why, right? Why do you want to be more consistent? Why do you want to grow? Why do you want to, why do you want to grow spiritually? Why do you want to be more financially stable, or some of these other things? Why do we want to be closer to God? And we can say, well, that's the right thing to do. But that's not really a good why statement. A good why statement, because we got to believe that for instance, the why would be, why do I want to go closer to God? Because I was created to bring God glory. That's a good why. I was created to bring God glory. Therefore, I'm going to stay consistent. That's my reason. That's my reason why, okay? I think if we have a good, solid why, then that carries us through. Because we become devoted. If it's based on desire, we're going to come up short at times, okay? Which leads me to the second one. We have to understand, now listen to this, and hear me out on this. We have to learn and understand and plan that we're not going to be perfect, that we're going to fail at times. Because sometimes if we think that we're going to fail, we won't even start, and then we've really failed, okay? We really fail. If we think, well, I'm never going to be able to do this consistently, so therefore I'm not even going to give it a shot. And you know and I know that sometimes that is the reasoning we use. But if we can understand, you know what, there's going to be times where I'm going to come up short, but I'm not going to let that discourage me. Do you think Daniel prayed ever? Do you ever think he missed one prayer? I mean, you got to believe that as a man, that something happened as a man or a human being, that something happened that distracted him or delayed him, whatever, got in the way, that perhaps maybe once in a while he missed a prayer time. I mean, but instead of discouraging him, he kept going. And I think that's what it's all about. We have to learn we're not going to be perfect. Now, that doesn't give us an excuse or an out. It's just simply saying, I'm human and I'm not going to shame myself, and I'm not going to quit and throw in the towel because I dropped the ball. No, I'm devoted, and I'm going to pick it back up, and I'm going to continue to move on. Which then leads us to the second. So we got the why down. We've got a good solid why. We're going to understand that we're human and we're not going to be perfect. And there's going to be times where we drop the ball, but that's okay. We're going to pick it up, and it's not going to be a characteristic of ours. It's going to happen from time to time. And the third one is this: we're going to fall in love with the process. I don't think Daniel was praying because it was a duty. I think he loved God. I think he was devoted to God. He loved being with God. He loved spending that time with God. He honored that time. And it was easy for him to stay consistent because it was about that. It was about his fellowship with God himself. I think sometimes we can get so wrapped up in the goal that we kind of miss the journey, right? I'm part of a men's group we call the Dudes Group, and we get together, we talk, and one of the things that we do is we read a book together, and then we kind of discuss it. But that's only the process. That's not, we're not falling in love with the goal. The goal's not just to read the book. That's part of the process. The book is there to give us a tool, a resource, so that we can have discussion and do life together and help each other where we may be struggling in certain areas. So you get, we fall in love with the process, not just the goal, okay? Not just the end goal. It's not just about reading the book, but it's about doing life together and having discussion and helping each other as we navigate through this life. That's when we become more successful. That's because we're predetermined that we are going to do life together. We're predetermined we're going to help each other. And the key is this: it's always with God's help. It's always with God's help. It's not because we're not going to be able to do it on our own. And we need other people that God places within our lives that God works through as well. But we're predetermined to do life together, to help each other, but we realize that it's always with God. It's always with God. Paul said, I don't even understand myself. And later on in that chapter 7, verse 24, he says this. He goes through and he talks about the prior verses, says, this is crazy. I want to do things that I don't want, I don't want to do what I know to do, but I do the things I hate to do. I'm sabotaging myself. And then he says this in verse 24 of chapter 7, what a wretched man I am. Talk about me. He's like, I can't do this. I am completely broken. And he asks the question, who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through the Lord Jesus Christ. Paul discovered it. I can't do it on my own. I am so broken, I can't do it on my own. Who can help me? God will. God will. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. We're predetermined. We're predetermined, and we're going to lean on God's help for us to become consistent. That's the key. Understand the why. Understand that you're human and you're going to drop the ball at times, but it's not going to define you. And 3 is fall in love with the process and rely on God's help.
I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out.